Let's focus on this fact. Between the Wannsee Conference of January 20th, 1942, and a report issued on September 30th, 1942, some 2 million Jews in central Poland were murdered. We've all heard of the atrocities committed in gas chambers and ovens in places like Auschwitz, but how did all of this really come about? At the outset, we need a little background about the precise fate of Poland during World War II. In August 1939, a secret protocol known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, dividing Northern and Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. When the war broke out on September 17, 1939, the USSR moved in from the east. On September 28th, Poland was divided into 3 parts. The east went to Russia, including the Baltic states. Western Poland was annexed to Germany. That left central Poland, which was to be German-controlled, civilian, and not directly annexed. It would be called the General Government, the Generalgouvernement. At its head was the infamous Hans Frank, a veteran Nazi who behaved as a local Hitler. He held supreme authority, setting up the governmental administration. Its headquarters would be in Krakow, not Warsaw, a direct insult to the Poles. Under Frank, 12 cabinet ministries were established, along with 4 district governments. These were based around the large cities, Krakow, Warsaw, Radom, and Lublin. The region of Galicia, including the city of Lviv or Lvov, was incorporated in the summer of 1941, becoming the 5th district. Each district was divided into counties, including urban and rural units, all with great detail under Frank. In some places, the bureaucracy ran well, in others, miserably. In general, administrative patterns were copied directly from Germany proper. There was, moreover, a strong and growing competition between the district regime and the central regime. The question was, who is in charge of local affairs? The central government or the local government? Sensing the confusion, Berlin sometimes sent representatives to various localities, bypassing Frank altogether. Parallel to Frank was none other than Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS and Minister of the Interior, both cabinet ministries. Himmler saw himself in charge of all police matters, though technically he was of a lower rank than Frank. Beneath Himmler was SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, head of the RSHA, the main office of Reich Security, a conglomeration of offices under the SS, part of which was the Gestapo, the Geheimstaatspolizei, or State Secret Police, as was the SD, the intelligence service. Himmler's apparatus was in direct competition with Frank. Also under the SS was Orpo, the regular police, incorporated into the SS in 1936. In charge was Kurt Deluege, parallel with Heydrich in the SS. Consequently, competing orders were often given to the Einsatzgruppen. All the while, Frank considered his police superior to the SS, and it was vice versa for Himmler. Next, we should consider the HSSPF, or Higher SS and Police Leader, of whom there were about 30 in Europe. The HSSPF acted as the local Himmler, always ready to cut through red tape to get things done, basically to perform an end run around the bureaucracy, outside of the established structure. The HSSPF would simply step in as needed. In Krakow, it was Kruger. But beneath the HSSPF was yet another bureaucrat, the SSPF. In Lublin, that official was one Odilo Globocnik. His job was to conduct an end run around Kruger, answering only to Himmler. Globocnik became the head of what was called Operation Reinhard. As for Reinhard Heydrich himself, he was assassinated in May 1942 by the Czech underground. Oddly enough, Heydrich had almost nothing to do with the murder of the Jews of the Generalgouvernement. Yes, he was in charge, while he lived, of the overall final solution, and he proved that at Wannsee. But its local implementation was outside his jurisdiction. Moreover, Heydrich's Einsatzgruppen were by no means alone, even in the initial stages of the genocide. And throughout those initial stages, competition was extremely fierce around Jewish policy. In the end, the SS emerged victorious over Hans Frank. But civilians remained in charge of day-to-day affairs. Civilian administrators were the ones who established the ghettos, and the Judenräte reported to civilians, not the SS. Why then did a prominent Nazi and later SS leader end up in charge of Operation Reinhard? Because of his particular skill set? Because he happened to be located in Lublin? Why was Lublin chosen by the Nazis as the city in Poland where Jews would be concentrated, the notorious Lublin Reservation? The answer to that lies in the simple fact that Lublin had for centuries been the main rabbinic center of world Jewry, drawing to its yeshivas some of the best Jewish students in Europe. Even many American Jewish communities recruited their rabbis from this region. The Nazis were doubtless convinced that holding Jews as hostages in Lublin would somehow weaken the conspiratorial web of world Jewry. It might well have been that whichever Nazi happened to be presiding over Lublin would have been chosen to head up Operation Reinhard. But it might also have been that Globocnik would have gotten the job wherever he was located. After all, Globocnik was personally indebted to Himmler, who had stepped in and saved him just before he was about to be put on trial for embezzlement. For that reason, Globocnik would go out of his way to please Himmler. He basically trampled Hans Frank's people. As SSPF, he would bypass the HSSPF, Kruger, just to get things done. Globocnik took his orders directly from Himmler to build Majdanek, to create SS and police colonies in the occupied USSR, and to organize Polish Jews for forced labor, which was originally his own idea. Globocnik determined the places and the nature of the murder, the manpower required, and the preparation of the Jews themselves. He sent out observers to evaluate the nature of the killings taking place in the USSR. The reports that came back were that mass shooting was not sufficiently effective. Some of the shooters were traumatized by the experience. Furthermore, it was a waste of bullets. Globocnik noticed, however, that Hitler's euthanasia program had officially ended in August 1941. Consequently, many workers in that program who had experience with gassing victims were requisitioned to work for the larger genocide. It was decided that carbon monoxide produced from the engines of captured Russian tanks would be put to use for this purpose. In time, Hitler's deputy, Rudolf Hess, decided on a nerve gas used as an insecticide, Zyklon B. But the logistics of the genocide itself were revolutionary. The idea was not that the murderers should go to the victims, but that the victims should be brought to the murderers. Using the railroads for whatever was to be done with the Jews appears to have been an early idea. But the death camps, as they came into focus, for them, it was important that they be located on railroad lines. Sobibor, for example, was a small town on a railroad line. Belzec was also a small village on a central railroad line. And Treblinka was on a railroad line in close proximity to Warsaw. An engineer working for the SS by the name of Kurt Gerstein left us some important primary source material in the form of personal notes. He took no satisfaction in what he observed. But does that excuse him on any level from his participation in the SS? He later maintained to friends that this experience made him determined to inform the world of the horrors taking place.
In Lublin, SS Gruppenführer Globocnik was waiting for us. He said, "This is one of the most highly secret matters there are, perhaps the most secret. Anybody who speaks about it is shot dead immediately." 2 talkative people died yesterday. Then he explained to us that at the present moment, August 17, 1942, there were the following installations. 1. Belzec, on the Lublin-Lvov road, in the sector of the Soviet demarcation line. Maximum per day, 15,000 persons. I saw it. 2. Sobibor. I am not familiar with the exact situation. I did not visit it. 20,000 persons per day. 3. Treblinka. 120 kilometers northeast of Warsaw. 25,000 per day. Saw it. 4. Majdanek, near Lublin, which I saw when it was being built. Globocnik said, "You will have very large quantities of clothes to disinfect, 10 or 20 times as much as the textiles collection, which is only being carried out in order to camouflage the origin of the Jewish, Polish, Czech, and other items of clothing. Your second job is to convert the gas chambers, which have up to now been operated with exhaust gases from an old diesel engine, to a more poisonous and quicker means, cyanide."
Here then are the 6 major death camps established by the Nazis. Auschwitz, built in 1940, converted to a death camp in 1941. Chełmno, built in December 1941, originally utilizing gas vans. Belzec, built in March 1942. Majdanek, built in the summer of 1941, converted to a death camp in 1942. Sobibor, built in April 1942. And Treblinka, built in July 1942. Globocnik was also in charge of providing staff for the camps. He trained them in a town near Lublin called Trawnicki. About 2,000 SS were trained. but there weren't nearly enough to go around. So a good many non-Germans were also trained, including Ukrainians, Latvians, and Estonians. Altogether, some 35,000 staff were made ready, though not all were used at the same time. On one occasion, Globocznik rerouted an entire SS unit to Bialystok to suppress an uprising there. That, of course, was his job description: perform an end run around the bureaucratic system as needed. When it came to preparing the Jews for their own annihilation, Globocznik began by taking a census, matching Jews with the needs of the Nazis. Jews were then issued new identity cards. A Type A card meant that the person was skilled and would be sent to Ghetto A. A Type B card meant unskilled, and that person would be sent to Ghetto B. The fate of those in Ghetto B was obvious. Of course, many places had no ghettos at all. Some ghettos were established before the mass murder began, others afterward. Whether those early ghettos were set up in anticipation of the genocide to follow is something still debated by Holocaust scholars. But it's clear that from late 1941 on, all ghettos were established with the clear intent of mass murder. As 1942 dawned, all bureaucratic competition over the outworking of the genocide vanished. From then on, Operation Reinhard, named posthumously for the assassinated Reinhard Heydrich, functioned as a well-oiled machine. The three distinct parts of Operation Reinhard included organized deportations under a senior commander named Hermann Höfle, the operation of the camps themselves under police captain Christian Wirth, and the confiscation of the booty, that is, the loot, under Gaylord Wippern. From the diary of Adam Chernyakov, head of the Warsaw Ghetto Judenrat, on the eve of the deportation in 1942, we read, July 22nd, 1942, at the community at 7:30 in the morning, the borders of the small ghetto are guarded by a special unit in addition to the usual one. At 10 o'clock, Sturmbannführer Höfle appeared with his people. We disconnected the telephone lines. The children were moved out of the little garden opposite. It was announced to us that the Jews, without regard to sex or age, apart from certain exceptions, would be deported to the east. 6,000 souls had to be supplied by 4 o'clock today. And this, at least, is how it will be every day. Sturmbannführer Höfle, the person in charge of the deportation, called me into the office and informed me that my wife was free at the moment, but if the deportation failed, she would be the first to be shot as a hostage. The next day, Chernyakov committed suicide. As for Globocznik, he himself committed suicide after the war while in prison. From the personal notes of Kurt Gerstein at the extermination camp at Belzec, we read,
Next morning, a few minutes before 7 o'clock, I was told that the first train would arrive in 10 minutes. In fact, the first train from Lvov arrived a few minutes later. There were 45 carriages with 6,700 persons, of whom 1,450 were already dead on arrival. To a small opening closed with barbed wire, One could see yellow, frightened children, men and women. The train stopped, and 200 Ukrainians who were forced to perform this service tore open the doors and chased the people from the carriages with whips. Then instructions were given through a large loudspeaker. The people are to take off all their clothes out of doors, and a few of them in the barracks, including artificial limbs and glasses. Shoes must be tied in pairs with a little piece of string handed out by a small 4-year-old Jewish boy. All valuables and money are to be handed in at the window, marked valuables, without any document or receipt being given. The women and girls must then go to the barber, who cuts off their hair with 1 or 2 snips. The hair disappears into large potato sacks to make something special for the submarines, to seal them and so on. The duty SS Unterscharführer explained to me. Then the march starts. Barbed wire to the right and left, and 24 Ukrainians with rifles at the rear. They came on, led by an exceptionally pretty girl. I myself was standing with Police Captain Wirth in front of the death chambers. Men, women, children, infants, people with amputated legs, all naked, completely naked, moved past us. In one corner, there is a whimsical SS man who tells these poor people in an unctuous voice, "Nothing at all will happen to you. You must just breathe deeply." That strengthens the lungs. This inhalation is necessary because of the infectious diseases. It is good disinfection. When somebody asks what their fate will be, he explains that the men will of course have to work, building streets and houses, but the women will not have to work. If they want to, they can help in the house or the kitchen. A little glimmer of hope flickers once more in some of these poor people, enough to make them march unresisting into the death chambers. But most of them understand what is happening. The smell reveals their fate. Then they climb up a little staircase and see the truth. Nursing mothers with an infant at the breast, naked. Many children of all ages naked. They hesitate, but they enter the death chambers, most of them silent, forced on by those behind them, who are driven by the whip lashes of the SS men. A Jewish woman of about 40, with flaming eyes, calls down revenge for the blood of her children on the head of the murderers. Police Captain Wirth, in person, strikes her in the face 5 times with his whip, and she disappears into the gas chamber.